I'd like to just kind of ask if there's anyone here that can remember back 71 years. I know there isn't, because you were all living with your heavenly parents in the spirit world then. But it was 71 years ago, like it was 3 months. January 1st, 1928. And something at that time happened. I was introduced to Grandpa.
He told me many times that his whole life he felt surrounded by just really good people.
Mother died when I was 2, and father died when I was 3. And of course, mother was only 26 or barely when she died, so she was just a young lady. But everyone talked about how beautiful she was and how much in love father and mother were. But father only lived a year after mother died, and his one friend says, you know, the doctors may not believe this, but I believe that it just kind of broke his heart when mother died.
You show the picture of them?
My brother Leroy and I were there, and Grandma and Grandpa called us and said to come into the bedroom. And Roy and I would have been 3 years old, and Roy would have been 5. And they had us get up to Father's bed, and Father looked at us both and wanted to give us a kiss, and then I remember just as clear as anything, he said, now, be good boys. But at times when I'd get a little anxious and a little concerned about just where my parents were, what they were doing, and when I had questions that I'd like to ask them, I'd go out, climb up in a tree, get up as high as I could, and I always felt like I was getting closer to them. And as I would get up there, I felt that I could visit with them. And I had a strong feeling that it was a great advantage to have them so available, and that they were watching me and watching over me, that they were interested in me. You mentioned how did I feel about being an orphan. I really knew that my parents were not living here like so many of the others were, but I never felt like I was really an orphan. I had parents, and I just appreciate so much what the bishop and others of Father's friends would tell me about him, and about how much they loved him and how much they learned from him, and how good a teacher he was. And I felt like, you know, he's teaching me too.
We lived on 3rd East and 3rd North in what we called the Clinker Brick Home. I was born out in a little farm home on the Walter Springfield. But we lived there in the Clinker Brick Home from the time I was about 2 on. And in the back, we had a huge garden stock, and we had cows, and we had chickens. And we used to drive the cows to the pasture, And in the evening we'd drive them back. And we used to deliver milk. We milked the cows and sell it to the neighbors. The little girl would deliver the milk. And we'd gather the eggs. And of course we always had a huge garden. And we'd help with that. And in those days I think it was quite typical that Mother would can hundreds, I mean really hundreds of 2-quart bottles of everything you can imagine. I think we just kind of did that, but you know, that was just part of our living, and we were always singing songs, and it was a happy experience. I guess we were a little spoiled.
All of us remember this so well that Mother sometimes before the day had really started their house early in the morning would nearly always, or very often at least, take us for little walks. And sometimes it was up at Temple Hill, and sometimes it wasn't even very far, but we'd look at the flowers along the ditch bank and see how beautiful everything was. But she would always be teaching us something important about life and about Heavenly Father, so that everything we did was kind of tied up with Heavenly Father, the things that He wanted us to do. And life seemed very wonderful because you always had Heavenly Father, no matter where you were, He was with you and watching over you.
I'm sure we had, problems and things, but as I look back on it, we were the happiest family you can imagine. We just were. There was a real sweet spirit in our home. We all had our work to do, and we did it. But we had a lot of fun. I'm sure we must have quarreled a little bit, but I can't remember that part very much. I would say it was be all joy.
There are lots of things I tried to do that Jennie, because Jennie thought I could do them. You know, she'd say, sure you can. And and so that was a big help to me. And I majored in drama, and the whole reason I majored in drama was because Jennie had majored in drama.
You know, Mother was saying that, she said, the only reason I majored in drama was because I was so shy. And I thought that if I did that, I would learn to not be so shy.
And it probably did.
And she was, yeah.
Father realized he didn't have his Sunday paper, and we weren't supposed to shop on Sundays, but he had to have that paper. So he told me to run to uptown and get him a Tribune, I think it was. He said it'll cost a dime. And the only change he had was a $10 bill. And he said, I think I can trust you. You should wrap it up carefully in your handkerchief, you know. And so I just went on uptown and bought the Tribune. And I took the $5 bill in change and held it tight in this hand. And then I took my hanky that I was supposed to wrap the change in and very carefully wrapped up $4.90 and tied it in my hanky. So I hurried on home. And Father had made the journey in such a quick time that he was still outside arguing with one of the neighbors about something he'd been fed in Sunday school class.
About the gospel doctrine class.
They used to really argue. And I said, we used to call him Papa. Papa, here's your paper. And he just took it. He was so involved in this argument. And then when I went to give him the change, all of a sudden I realized I didn't have the $5 bill in my hand. Well, you know, in those days, $5 was a huge amount of money. I remember I thought, oh, I've lost that $5 bill. And he was still involved. I hurried in the house. This is the way our mother had trained us. And I remember in Mother's bedroom there was an extra big closet. And I went into that closet and closed the door, and I knelt down and I prayed. I was desperate. I said, Heavenly Father, I've got to find that bill. I've got to find it fast. And then I said, thank you, Heavenly Father, for helping me. And I got up and I walked out, just paused to, I'd find it. And I hurried as fast as I could, but looked all over the sidewalk of Aunt Jennie's. And I walked through the house, and I sat down in that black chair. No one was home yet. And I looked down, and there was the $5 bill on the floor. You've heard me tell this. And so I hurried back and gave him the full change. But then I went back into that closet. This is the way Mother taught us, And I knelt down and I said, oh, Heavenly Father, thank you so much. I knew you would.
I think I always held Jennie in a way kind of in awe, because I knew Jennie would never do anything bad. Even the time I was little, I knew that, I always felt like she was such a perfect person that always did everything right. And yet, very sweet and loving. But I was a little bit in awe because I was always thinking of such interesting problem things to do.
They didn't have 11 all at once. I was to college when Gloria number 10 was born. And so the most they would have had was 10. But the whole secret of it is so simple. Just have Mary and Julia come first and then have them tend the kids.
How did she announce when there was a new baby on the way? I mean, what was there a ritual? Yeah. Was it?
No. Well, do you know, I only remember one time, which was a dramatic time, because she told us a story about her mother, and how this beautiful, and I remember, so she tried this with me, and I don't know if Mary was there, but she was saying, we're going to have another baby, and I said, oh no, don't we have enough? and Mother was just devastated, how could I? So I'm sure there were other times, but that's the one I remember.
Most everybody else's parents that I was friends with were at an age where those parents could have been children of my parents. When the older kids were young, there were probably a lot more physical and recreational sort of things. In fact, I remember finding an old shotgun down in the basement that I understand Dad used to go hunting with, but it was quite different. I think Louis and Gloria and I probably had similar experiences in that setting, with the parents being a little bit older. Mother did take up skiing when she was about 50, I think, in an effort to try to get us to feel that she was still spry and able to do those sort of things. That didn't last very long. Dad went hiking with me once and got a lot of blisters on his feet, and I certainly don't feel deprived at all. I feel more honored that they would, they really did everything they could to be to provide as good of a home, as fun of a home, as to do the best they could. And I think, on the contrary, it was probably my selfishness and expectations that they should be able to do everything the 30 and 40-year-old parents were doing when my parents were 60.
When I got a little bit older, then Mom would leave me with the children. And not to single out David, but he kind of came in the position where he was the one that would be the most imaginative in his tricks. I remember one very disruptive time when Mom and Dad left me with the children. They probably went to conference, and I tried to make rules and tell them what to do, but Mom had made it very clear, these are my kids and you can't punish them. I puzzled, how can I discipline them if I can't punish them? And this one time David wanted to go swimming in the yard. I don't know how he was going to make a swimming pool in the yard, But I said, no, you can't. I was trying to exercise my authority. And the next thing I knew, water started dripping down from the upstairs into the downstairs. And he had built his swimming pool on one of the mattresses on one of the beds upstairs.
I always worried about my friends coming, because some of them were kind of mean and would talk about, you know, oh, what a messy place, you know.
I asked Mother one day if she didn't have any social consciousness about having so many children and having children so late, and she replied to me that definitely it was a mistake, that she should have stopped at 10.
If I were left alone, if Mother went someplace, which would happen quite often, and I really loved that. I loved when I was just in charge. And I would go put them up in the tub. They were all little boys, you know. And then I would clean the front room. That was always my thing. And then I would get them out, dress them all in clean clothes. Yeah, there was a lot of chaos, a lot of energy, a lot of noise, a lot of clutter.
I think Mom and Dad, and especially Mother, tried her very best to be supportive and be right there with the younger parents at the football games, and it wasn't always easy for them. They would sit there in those cold bleachers and cheer for me. I don't think they had a clue what was going on in the games.
I've felt that Mother had such faith that what she was doing was right. You know, this was her high calling, and
raising
to have as many children as were sent to her, and that though there were hard times, you know, she'd seen her mother do it, and she had such respect for her mother.
The other thing I loved when I got to be a little bit older, I loved to like rock and hold George when he was a little baby. That was I felt really important if I was able to hold the babies.
I remember his telling me once, he said, you know, I figure you have a big family and most of them turn out. That's pretty good or something. So, but Mother doesn't think that. It's everyone.
When I was a Boy Scout, I knew I could never get my first class, let alone my Eagle, because I couldn't swim. And as a Boy Scout, I think we were Boy Scouts at 11, maybe 12, and I couldn't swim. Everyone else that I knew, my friends, they could swim. And so I asked Dad once, I said, can you take me up to Heisey Hot Springs to practice swimming? Now, just being a young 11-year-old or 12-year-old, I didn't really realize how busy my dad was. He was probably the bishop at the time, or had other church responsibilities. He had his work that he was developing, his own business. He had all the other kids. But he dropped all of that the very time I asked him, just dropped whatever else he had, and he drove me all the way up to Heisey Hot Springs. I don't know how far it was. Do you remember how far away that was, Julia? Or do you even remember Heisey Hot Springs?
Remember it, yeah.
But it was quite a ways away. Just Dad and I. And he started to teach me how to swim. And I remember the first thing I learned was just to float, so I didn't have the fear of the water. So I could just float. And then gradually I'd learn to swim. But he would constantly do things like that.
One fairly early memory that really shows what Dad is like is they had got a babysitter, a young girl who lived across the street. And this babysitter, while they were gone, anyway, when they came back, she was asleep on the couch. And instead of waking her up, Dad carefully picked her up and carried her home.
when we were playing, Lewis and some of the boys in the neighborhood were playing baseball in our backyard, and Dad just came in and started pitching the ball and batting the ball, and it was quite a revelation to realize that he really knew how to play baseball. I never really even thought that that was a possibility, that he could actually know how to play baseball. I just accepted that he was born before baseball was even invented, and but he was great. He was a great player.
You were mentioning a poem you remember, Grandpa.
It was about the old owl, and it goes something like this. There was an old owl who sat in a tree as quiet can be. The longer he sat, the less he spoke. The less he spoke, the more he listened. The more he listened, the more he heard. Oh, why can't we be like that wise old bird? And Dad always would make sure the rhymes were obvious. That wise old bird. And I think that Dad was a very, very good listener.
Yes.
He was the kind of listener that wasn't always trying to find the next thing to say, but he would actually respond to what you were saying. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very unusual to have a listener like that, because usually people are going to tell you the next thing and they're planning it out what to tell you. But he was a very, very good listener, so I think he was like that wise old bird.
And I think you are too.
But I don't remember Grandpa ever getting particularly mad, although when he did get mad, we would have dinner, and if there was some fighting at the dinner table, Grandma would say, "Delbert, do something to control these kids." And Dad would say, well now. And then Grandma would say, "Do something, Delbert." And so Dad would get up, and the thing he would do in that type of crisis was get the worst offender, which was usually David, and twist his ear. That was twist his ear. And I'm sure I got a few ear twistings myself.
He would say, "Now, never mind. Now you just never mind."
Is that all?
Well, I remember being pinched on the ear and pulled really hard. But no, he was never. I never remember him ever hitting or being physical, but definitely he would raise his voice and he would insist on compliance, and usually got it.
You know, David was kind of rebellious at a point of time, which caused a lot of turmoil and stress in the family. I remember once he stole the family car. I don't know if you can steal a family car, but he would take it without permission on a Sunday instead of going to church, and he's driving down 12th Street, and Grandpa came out and stopped him and said, "Now you get out of this car this minute." And David was very rebellious and threatened back and said, if you make me get out now, I'm going to go right down and to the Army enlistment place and enlist in the Army, and you'll never see me again. And Dad just backed off and said, "Drive safely," or something to that effect, and let him go.
So what I remember about discipline is Mom's telling Dad quietly and kind of privately that I'd done something wrong, and then Dad taking me aside and speaking to me very quietly and very persuasively about what I had done wrong. And man, I would do everything right to avoid one of those lectures.
This is one thing that I was really impressed with Dad, is that we were coming from Lewiston to go back to wherever we were staying, Kamai or Kuskia or some darn place, and there was a hitchhiker. And Dad picked up this hitchhiker, and he was just, you know, I don't know, University of Washington or Washington State type of guy, and he was all dirty and had his pags and everything, and he wanted to smoke, and Dad says, no, you can't smoke in our car. And while we were driving, he was kind of telling about where he wanted to go to Europe and everything, and it was like, I don't know, 1970 or 71 or some darn thing, and so it was kind of the hippie movement. And Dad just told him, he said that he should clean up, take a good shower, shave off his beard, and get a job. you know, a good, honest job. You know, and I think this guy was just flabbergasted, and I was kind of flabbergasted. I was kind of impressed that Dad didn't have any gumption in letting him know what he thought.
I do have a memory of Dad that was just really special. I remember when I went to BYU, I actually, my first year was good. It was the second year I got very depressed. Didn't even know that's what it was then. That's what it was, you know, but looking back, I had I got depressed, very depressed, and had to come home, and I just felt so bad about, you know, that, and not being able to continue school, and but it was to the point where I couldn't, and so I came home, and I just remember went for a walk with Dad. He wanted to go for a walk with me, and he shared with me a time when he had I don't remember specifically what it was, but it was a time where he hadn't finished something. It might have been school, or, you know, where he failed. He shared with me that. And that meant so much to me. It was such a comforting thing to me, because I felt like such a failure, and yet there wasn't anything I really could do about it that I knew of, you know, at the time. And for Dad to share that with me just meant the world to me, because I respected him so much. And so I felt like, you know, if he had that kind of experience and look where he is now, you know, there's hope for me. And that is an experience that I will always cherish. I just really appreciated him just sharing that with me.
If I've described Dad as being mild-mannered and patient and very careful to never give offense, Mother wasn't necessarily the mirror image of that, but you always, at least I always sensed quite a bit more intensity and clear-cut goals and a sense of time evaporating from Mom. Now, I'm not saying that positive or negative for either one of them, but I think that they did each have a little different personality in that regard. And you probably all remember this. Doth thou love life? You know, do you remember? Do not squander time. That's the stuff life is made of. Well, that never came from Dad, did it? No. I think that came from Mom.
But I remember climbing up high into the cupboards. We had in our kitchen. We had the wall cabinets that were normal height, and then there were cabinets on top of those, clear up, you know. So you'd have to have a ladder or climb. A kid would to get up to them. And I'd got all the way up and found the Christmas candy, and I was just elated, that I'd found it. But I got caught before I got all the way down by Mom, and she was very, very stern, and I was just screaming mad that I didn't get to have the candy. And so I was pretty much out of control. I didn't want her walking in the kitchen at the moment she did. It must have been that. It's hard to say, but I remember that she put her hands on her hips, and she told me to settle down, to behave myself, to stop, because I think I might have been physically fighting against her, to not let her take the candy away from me that I'd had to retrieve, but I don't remember exactly. But I do remember that she finally just kind of calmly said something to the effect of, "By the authority of the priesthood invested in my husband, I command the evil spirits to leave you." And it did kind of shock me out of my temper tantrum.
The thing that amazed me about Mom is even when I was off my mission, my friends, I remember I was working this one job that I worked from 9 o'clock at night or till 7 or 8 in the morning. We'd have a break around midnight. Mom would stock our refrigerator with oranges and apples, and she says, "Bring your friends, from the break, and have grapes or different things, and they just thought, my word, our parents would never allow us to come, and have grapes and apples and bread and different things. But she loved to have your friends come by. It was amazing.
I think Mother very much lived in the real world, even though sometimes I think we thought she didn't. She lived in this idealistic world, but I wasn't that popular with always having dates to all the dances, but it was very important to me. And so I always would come home for lunch, even though there was lunch available at all the schools. But even in high school, I would walk home for lunch and then walk back. And that would be the lunch hour, which was an hour. And a lot of the kids that didn't come home for lunch would just stay and socialize, because lunch didn't last for an hour. But I was complaining this one day that I was feeling so bad because I didn't have a date to this dance. And as we finished up, it was, I was going to walk back to school, and Mom said, "I'm just going to drive you back today." So she drove me back, and right there in front of IF High School, she dropped me off with these instructions. She said, "Now just go in there and flirt and you'll get your date." So I think I ended up getting a date. I don't know if that particular couple of 20 minutes maybe got me the date, but it was okay, that's how you do it.
When Mom and Dad met Bonnie was an interesting story. That was, we came in and woke them up at night and said we were engaged, and Mom bounced right up out of bed and said how happy they were, and then she asked Bonnie how old she was, and Bonnie was just 19 at the time, and Mother said, "Just right." And then she said, "How tall are you?" And Bonnie said, 5 feet. She said, "Just right."
And I do remember the one time going on such a trip when I fell out of the car. I have that memory. And I remember how shocked my mother was. She was really, really upset. And I was as I remember the incident, it's a kind of a family memory, but I remember, and it was typical of me, I probably was a little bit rebellious, and Mother said, "Don't put all the gum in your mouth," or something like that, and I did anyway, and so she made me throw it out. Or maybe I was supposed to share the gum with somebody and I didn't. But anyway, trying to open the window, I opened the door instead, and the way the doors opened outward into the wind, it pulled the door out and sucked me out of the car. And I actually remember bouncing, I have some memory on the road, and then the next thing I remember was being in the doctor's office and being paddled on my behind to get me to cry or to come out of being unconscious. And Mother was just beside herself. I was more worried about her than myself because she thought that something was really, really, really wrong. And of course, maybe it was a close call and really scary for a young mother.
When there were these electrical storms and the lights would go out, and she would gather us about her and light a candle and rock the baby in the rocking chair, and didn't want us to be nervous, but I think she's the only one that would have been nervous.
I could share so many stories about Mom. I'll tell you one that probably no one has heard because I don't think I've ever told it before. But I remember coming home from primary. We'd walk home from primary. It was held on Wednesday afternoons at probably 4 o'clock after school. And as I was walking home, one of the boys, approximately my age, taught me a bad word, a obscene word, which I had no idea what it meant. And when I walked in the house coming home from primary, Mother was in the living room of the house with some women, and I don't know whether it was like a Relief Society presidency meeting or there were some other women there in the room, and they were visiting. And I walked in. How old would have I been? Maybe again like 6 years old or 5 years old or something. And right off the bat decided to try this new word I had just learned walking home from primary from my primary friends. And it was to me like a flash of lightning. I had no time to think, to apologize, to regroup, to give an explanation or anything. I was instantly grabbed, taken from the room, taken 3/4 the way up the stairway, and slapped absolutely silly. Now, Dad never did that. Dad twisted my ear, but I was totally in shock. But I've never used that word again. That word was totally erased from my vocabulary.
When she was having these kids, the children every 2 years, that the Relief Society president got a hold of her, and there was a visitor from Salt Lake, and they were going to visit with her on birth control. And they invited her over, and we're explaining some of the facts of life, and Mother just couldn't understand that at all. She says, I'm having these kids because I want to have these kids. And they just couldn't understand why anybody would want to have this many kids.
I always had this sense in working with Mom that here was a very intelligent, capable person who was willing to use that great capacity and that energy to help me.
I remember once, one of the few times I remember Mom getting pretty upset with me was when I had that room on the very back of the house that didn't have any heat in it, where that kind of they'd closed in something. Anyway, I would stay up late at night and work on electronic type things. I was just fascinated by that. And I remember one night Mom came up and said, "Now get to bed." And so I would turn off the lights and wait until I was pretty sure she was in bed. And I could usually hear there were some squeaks in the floor and the steps. And I remember one night I'd gotten back up and turned the lights on and was working away at this. It was an old 78 RPM record player. I didn't build the record player, but the amplifier. I'd gotten all the parts and was putting it on. And all of a sudden, here was Mom at the door. I was so engrossed that I didn't hear her. Boy, she was really upset. I told you to go to bed. You can't be a good student if you don't get your sleep, and so on. And I said, "Mom, just listen, just one more thing." And I soldered one more thing. I said, "Just listen." I said, and turned it on. I said, "It works." And I didn't know whether it worked or not because it was, put it on, put the little needle on, and the sound, and it came through. It worked. I said, "See, Mom, it works." It was Burl Ives singing "Sky Riders in the Sky." Or let's see, it was that old song about something about dying, and then he was the bad guy, and so he was sent to hell, and it was
Just
Riders in the Sky. That's what it is. Riders in the. Be a good boy, or you'll become one of the devil's riders in the sky, and so forth. And I can remember of Mom. She was really angry, and then when she heard it play, she just softened and said, "That's wonderful, John. Now would you please go to bed?"
In a way, Mother's a perfectionist, and yet not an unrealistic one, but in the sense of being the ideal Mormon mother. You know, this was just very, very important to her.
I went to the BYU from the time I was 4, 2 years of kindergarten, so clear on that. But I remember I had stayed after school till play practice, and a young man by the name of Bill McCord walked me home. I was only about 5 or 6, you know. And just said goodbye, and I went in. Bobby said, "Wasn't that Bill McCord?" I said, "Yes." And he and I had the lead in a play at BYU sometime later. I had no personal interest in him at all. But I remember Father said, "You know, he's a nice young man, but he's not a Mormon." So, you know, we don't date young men. I was just barely starting to date. So I knew that, you know, and I didn't even need to be reminded. He just wanted to make it very certain that I understood those particular things.
Yeah, she had a pretty black and white view of a lot of things, and yet, you know, if there was an excellent music teacher who wasn't a member of the church and maybe who had smoked something, that was not a problem. If they were an excellent teacher. It was better if they weren't a member of the church. You know, bless her heart, she was so good, just so totally good, and so wanted her children to be her definition of what they were supposed to be. And you know, I don't know if there was someone who really tried to understand how she felt.
I think you could say it was a house of sort of spiritual and intellectual order, but not necessarily physical order.
You know, my growing up, I was, you know, there were babies every other year, and you know, when I left, I mean, we still had George after I went away to college. So I was, you know, there was always just lots of little kids and an awful lot to do. And for the first, while we didn't have an automatic washer for quite a while, and we'd have several tubs, one that had bleach and
all those diapers.
That's what I was thinking.
all those diapers, exactly, and they were constantly. Usually there would be at least 2 in diapers. And yeah, the disposable diapers were a pretty modern invention.
And I think Mom had her different priorities. Hers was the life of the mind, and the other things, you know, the spirit and the mind, that was what was important.
We did get a dishwasher. I remember that was quite a big event. And they didn't work very well. You basically had to wash the dishes, then put them in. And I remember washing the dishes in the dishwasher once, and they came out and they were very dirty. And I remember Dee saying, "These dishes are dirty." And I said, "Well, they're sterilized." And he said, "Well, do you want to eat sterilized manure?"
Whenever we would run out of clothes around our house, and you older people maybe don't remember this, but when we would run out of clothing as a youngster in our house, we would wait for the White Star Laundry to deliver our clothing, all pressed and ready for us to wear, because that's where we got it from.
I thoroughly enjoyed doing laundry. It was before automatic washers, dryers. It was before disposable diapers. So it was very frequent. We would be washing diapers probably at least every other day, don't you think? And then hanging them out on the wall. I enjoyed that. You just run them through the wringer and then then go outside and hang them with clothespins on the line.
The main thing that of value that I got from the home is that I did have a real sense of security, and I really felt that there were pretty much simple answers to the main questions in life, and I think that served me well to then break away from that.
She was a good cook. It was really good food and healthy and so on. It wasn't as neatly presented as the meals I would get at J.C. Hart's or Bruce Stanger's, but it was really good food.
My recollection as a young boy was partly how good it was, but partly how I had to hurry up and eat it before someone else did, kind of, you know.
And so I would kind of guard my food, check it out, and the very best thing, eat it first right away.
But Mother, well, she cooked bread, and you all tasted her wonderful bread. And that was our standard breakfast was whole wheat bread and whole wheat toast and dipped in tomato juice.
I really can just almost at any time when I really think about it can go back and just close my eyes and smell that aroma of that fresh baked bread. And I really felt she was an excellent cook, even though her kitchen was an absolute shambles most of the time, you know. And
I just marvel how much Mother did, and all the cooking of food. And we came home from school for lunch too, you know, and she didn't have any, any free time. She'd have to have lunch on for us, and it'd just be getting. I don't know how she'd get breakfast cleaned up. The dishes were always, it's like always piled up. So many dishes, and so much cooking. But like I said, she just had such faith that this was her mission.
But let's say this, Julie and I were both saying, we didn't really do the cooking.
No, none of us, I think none of Mother's daughters are really good cooks like she was.
She was a good cook, but she did it.
She did it. I think it was because she needed the kids out of the way and the kitchen to herself.
Well, I remember we'd go through little stages, and I remember that one time where I got the phrase that I'm always use with my family now: we're going to be civilized. Okay, we're really going to be civilized now. And she got little napkin holders with our names on them. And we were going to change everything and be really civilized and sit, in the right places. And I think that lasted for once or twice.
I only remember having good meals all the time. I just admire her. She cooked, she baked bread frequently, and it was good. She used whole wheat flour. She kind of liked to go to Lehigh and shop and get the flour there, and mix it with molasses, and very good. And she was fabulous at desserts. You remember the pumpkin pie, and I particularly remember the butterscotch brownies and the Pinocchi candy as examples of good desserts. Then, by the time we got to 12th Street, you see it's different by this point because there's so many kids around the house, whereas in the first two homes, they were fewer children. But by the 12th Street time, then we all remember when it was mealtime. Mary, or Julia, or John, go downstairs and bring up 6 cans of chicken noodle soup and 6 cans of fruit cocktail. So she adapted.
Dad told me one time, he said, you don't know what it's like to not have enough money to feed your family. And I said, well, tell me about it. And he said, well, that's really how I became a Democrat. And I said, what's that? And he said, well, there was a time, must have been in the mid-30s, when we were really having a hard time. We had more children, and Mom, as you know, Mom just said, no, if the Lord wants us to have children, we'll have children. You figure it out. But I think Dad told me that, well, I don't think he did tell me, that at that time it was so much hand to mouth, just kind of, if an insurance policy didn't renew or if something didn't happen, it was so tenuous, right on the edge, that he decided he needed to run for public office that paid some money. And that's why he decided to run for Justice of the Peace, because it had a little stipend every month. And he thought that he knew a lot of people, and he thought they would really help him. And Mom, of course, was a very strong Republican, and Dad just followed along. I don't think he was strongly one way or the other, but so he went to the Republican Party in Bonneville County and asked if he could run for Justice of the Peace. And they said, well, if you want to, but we already have someone running for that, and we wouldn't be able to help you because we already have a candidate. If you wanted to run against him in the primaries, you could, but we wouldn't be able to spend any of our money. You'd have to do it all on your own. He decided he needed this money bad enough that he ran and got beat in the primary by the Republican candidate. And then about a few weeks, maybe 3, 4, or 5 weeks before the election, the person running for Justice of the Peace on the Democratic Party died. So the Democratic Party came to Grandpa and said, now we noticed that you ran in the primaries. Would you run in the finals as the Democratic candidate, because our candidates died, and we hardly ever elect a Democrat in Bonneville County, but we will give all of our attention, all of our money, all of our resources, all of our time to getting you elected. And he said, sure, I really need the job. So he did, and so in the finals, he beat the guy that beat him in the primaries. And he always felt that there was something special about the Democratic Party at that time, that they were more interested in people and situations, and that the Republicans were a little, more wealthy and the old conservative type thing. And so I do know that he did worry about money, because, I remember them telling me, well, this is the farm that I was able to sell in such and such a year, and just barely in time, because the commission from that really made it possible to have Christmas in 1937 or some year like that. So yeah, but he never showed it. He said, in fact, I know he said, well, the Lord always provided, that something always came through.
I sure do remember what a relief it was to go to Idaho Falls, where money wasn't an issue.
Yeah, it was probably a big issue to Dad, but somehow that was something that was never incorporated into our family. Mm-hmm. Like I remember going to buy a dress with Mom, and the price of the dress was never the issue. Was it modest? Did I look pretty in it? And that was, so we never even looked at the price tag. When I went off to college, I just was given a checkbook, and I remember one time writing a check for $200 because I needed some more money. And it didn't even dawn on me. I was so stupid that you had to have money in an account. I just thought that you just, however much you just, and I remembered John and Dad both calling me and saying, you have to let us know when you're going to be writing checks. So that was an 18-year-old who had no concept of banks and how banks worked and checks, any of that. And perhaps I'd been taught, but it didn't register because money was just never something that was just not in our realm of the realities that our family functioned around.
Yeah.
Do you remember Cape Curley Park, Julia? Yeah. Anyways, we had this friend. We were like 12 and 13, and this friend was older, like maybe high school age. He went and knocked a ball over to 10th Street and broke out the main window in this one house, and then he took off. And there was the three boys. I think it was Richard Strong, myself, and maybe one of the Reese kids. And at the time, I don't remember, it was fairly expensive, it was like $20 or $25. And Dad and Mom just said that, we said, we didn't do it, this other guy. And they said, you were playing and the window got broke, so you're going to pay. And I remember we each had to come up with about $5, which was a lot of money at that time to get the window repaired. I remember that.
I can remember a few times of wondering, gee, I don't know how Dad can make any money, because when people would come in and couldn't pay their rent or couldn't make their payments, and he'd say, well, I'll give you some more time or whatnot. I mean, he was always very, very generous, and never, real strict and real, well, you've got to do it or you're out. Although I don't think he let people, completely take advantage of him.
That Dad had to really work hard and earn a lot just to support everybody, to take care of the family. The mother never did work, as far as I know, that she never made a dime.
I think she never followed a budget either.
we used to, this was later on, I shouldn't have probably said that to her, but I said, why don't you, do something about it? And it was interesting that even though Dad was a director of the bank, that he kept Mother's personal account in another bank for a while anyway. And I felt like we always seemed to have plenty of money, but when Mom would get really frustrated having all of the kids, and maybe a couple of them still in diapers and some in their rebellious teenage years, when she would get really frustrated, she would go on a spending spree. That was her way of, relieving the frustration. And she would just spend a lot of money. I guess she just had the access to it through the checkbook or whatever. I don't think we had credit cards then. And then Grandpa would talk to her. Now, we never heard these conversations, but Grandpa would talk to her and say, you just can't do that. But he would never really get angry. But then Grandma or Mom would come to us kids and she would say, I've done a terrible thing. I've just spent a lot of money on things we really didn't need, and so we're going to have to live on bread and milk for the next month. And that would last about one meal. And then we'd be back to our normal meat and potatoes.
And this is how Mom would shop. She would write a note and a list, and she would either send one of us over to the store with the list, or she would telephone the list to the grocer, then they would pack it and deliver it.
And it would
home.
Be charged.
And it would be charged, right? No money would be exchanged.
Money wasn't valued, but the things that money could buy, like a college education and things like that, I think, I just always am amazed that how many people Dad put through college.
Right. She did have to do things extremely well. And they needed to be done better than they'd ever been done before. And she would really prepare. And that was, I remember a time that everything else in the house would just kind of be left. And his mother was preparing her Relief Society lesson.
And everything she did, when she'd do things, she'd do really well. And I think Dad even kind of had an attitude that maybe it didn't need to be done quite that well sometimes. Mom had a very high academic standard. She really wanted excellence. I mean, mediocrity, average, even better than average was not good enough. I mean, it's like she had a perfection standard. That was just normal. That was just sort of expected. Of course she got straight A's. You know, that's what Grobergs do. That's what Holbrooks do. They got straight A's.
See, a lot of you probably didn't go through this, but we wanted to read comic books. TV was not a problem. It wasn't TV. The way we wasted time was reading comic books or playing marbles, but marbles was mainly at school. But there was a regular crusade against comic books by Mother. Comic books, you were wasting your mind.
You hid them under your bed.
Yeah, and you shouldn't read them. Well, we came up with this idea, what about classic comic books? A comic book that told the story of one of the classics. Mm-hmm. So we tried that on Mom, and that was kind of different. They could be tolerated because now we were reading one of the classics.
There was one weakness, it seems to me, but that even could be very small, very minor, and maybe and very excusable, and that was she didn't like psychology.
She didn't trust anyone who had anything to do with it.
She thought that psychology was a troublesome area of study.
And there were a lot of conflicts, and I remember really feeling very pushed to get as educated as I could and learn as much as I could, and that Mom particularly really wanted me to be well educated, not only in the arts but also in science, and of course in music, which was such a big part of our life growing up and still continues to be a big part in my life now, which I'm very grateful for. But the conflict of what science seemed to teach and what Mom's version of the universe was just always really seemed like a puzzle to me. You know, how can you say think for yourself and yet only think this way? Think the way I do, but think for yourself. Yeah. And I think it led to a lot of really heated arguments between Mom and I, because she was adamant that I needed to think for myself, but the way myself should think is exactly the way she thinks. And you probably were aware of some of the tension that went on because of that, and went on for many, many years, because her way was absolutely right, and to her it was.
And the other thing I really want to talk about is Mom as a teacher, as a gospel doctrine teacher. It was a full week program for her to just get the gospel doctrine, and boy, she just really had the spirit, when she taught, and I just loved going into hear her gospel doctrine classes. That she was a good teacher, and she loved speech and drama, and that was something that she wanted to work with everybody to have them give really good talks.
Describe what her classes were like.
They were it was just wonderful. She would have the lesson in the gospel doctrine. It was just like standing room only. She would just have it just perfected.
So well prepared.
Just so well prepared that she would have. She would go to the effort, to make signs and different things, and prompts and different things. I mean, she would whatever the message was, say if the message was the atonement, she'd have 3 or 4 posters, and she'd have the pictures, and she would, you know, bear her testimony and tell about the prophet's testimony, you know, concerning the atonement. I mean, when you finished her lesson, you knew the principle. The principle was taught. I mean, she was a master teacher, just really a master teacher.
Yeah, in fact, I have thought, just speculating, you know, if Mother had not been able to have a big family, if she had been widowed or, you know, something, I don't think she would have stayed home just with 1 or 2 children. Or I think she would have got a PhD. She would have been a university president, or, you know, something. She was just extremely capable, and really loved excellence, and loved to influence people. And she was just very capable, and she really respected people like, I remember Virginia Cutler and some other women who became real education leaders. That Mother had much respect for them.
I always got the feeling, particularly from Mom, that we were all really special. We were white, we were Americans, we were Christians, we were Mormons, and we were Holbrooks. And that just narrowed it down or up till we were right on the pinnacle. I mean, and in a sense, it might have made me, or some of us, even kind of too proud or too arrogant. And I think at school sometimes we would act that way, although that's only in retrospect. I didn't feel that at the time. I didn't feel like I'm better than all these other people. But now that I think back on it, I think I probably looked down on most people, thinking that we were the elite elect of the elect. So I have mixed feelings whether that was good or bad.
But it was good for you, you feel? I mean, it gave you confidence.
Yeah, it gave me confidence. And I always had a lot of confidence, but maybe too much confidence. You know, maybe some confidence that wasn't really warranted.
I remember feeling so like the Grobergs were so important, and having the name of Groberg was such a big deal, and everybody had to kind of go out of the way to please us as little Grobergs in Idaho Falls, because I think Dad did have a really good reputation, and it was well known and well respected, and Mom also. But when I remember the first time that it was like an existential crisis, I think it was on that trip we took back east, but we went to a beach, and there were hundreds of thousands of people on this beach, and not one of them knew me or cared about me. And I really felt that was just such an outrage, you know. But it also occurred to me that I wasn't that important, pretty insignificant little kid, you know. Yeah. But it was nice feeling special, you know. I think Mother thought that all of us should be really amount to something, you know, that we already were really something, and that seemed to be a program for us. And maybe it was valuable, but it's also something I had to get over, I think, to find a more humble and a more realistic role in life. I remember being so delighted at Christmas. Christmas times were just, we'd stay awake all night trying to be the first ones up or catch somebody like Santa Claus.
We'd get up real early, and then we'd have to, I'd say about like 4, before we'd start on checking out our loot. what we'd get for Christmas was we'd have to have orange juice or an orange or something like that.
The most memorable for me was the year that the boys, and I'm not sure which boys, but I kind of think it was probably Dee and Dick, took all the candy out of my stocking that, of course, Santa Claus had put there. At Christmas morning, I woke up and very eager to come down and see our stockings, and we all had to go by order of, was it youngest to oldest or oldest to youngest? I thought it was oldest to youngest, but I don't know. And then when I came down, there was my stocking full of black lumpy coal. So I was devastated, and I was a very gullible little child, sensitive and gullible. And I truly believed that this was from Santa Claus, and I just thought I had been a pretty good girl.
Poor little Beth.
And the end result that I just remember was that I got a lot of candy from my brother's stockings.
Christmas time, the first year that I had gone away to college, because before then we would pick potatoes during the month of October, and actually earned pretty good money. It was the only money I ever earned, until I finally taught school. I mean, I never had a job. I always wanted one. I always wanted to work and earn money, but my folks let me just spend the money. And I remember my senior year, I think I earned like $200, which was really a lot. And I just spent it all on Christmas presents for everybody. I would Christmas shop, and anyway, I really prided myself in being the big giver, and how much everybody loved me because I gave them such good presents. And then when I came home after my first semester of freshman, and I didn't have any money at all, and no gifts, and I was really just kind of feeling depressed. And Grandpa invited me to go. He said, "Why don't you come Christmas shopping with me?" And so he took that time, and we just went to a few stores. And like I said before, it felt like I was with Santa Claus. He knew everyone. Everyone knew him, and he just had such a joyful time. I don't remember whether we bought anything. We probably did, but it was a whole change for me to say, this is what Christmas is all about. It's not about impressing people with how good you are. It's about sharing and spreading joy, and but I thought that was just wonderful.
We'd all be lined up all the way to the corner, he said, from our house going to church. And all the Grobergs were going to church. And just out the door, and there wasn't any arguments. Well, I don't know about that, but we were all at church, all headed to church. And that was, of course, that was a big part of life, was just the church.
Yeah. I do remember seeing Dad studying the scriptures, just on his own. I remember just being aware that he loved the scriptures.
We had fun, and you probably remember shelling almonds, and we would do this Sunday if we came home from sacrament meeting. Sacrament meeting would get over about 6 o'clock or 6:30 or something, and we would come home, and my friends were always invited to come, and we would come and we would shell almonds and kind of fry them with butter on our stove there in the kitchen. And Mother would facilitate this, and we would pop popcorn back
When you say shell, you mean crack the nuts?
No, we would soak them. We'd soak them in water and boiling water, and then take I shouldn't have said shell. Skin them, and then fry them and eat them. And this was a great treat for my friends. And then we would pop popcorn, and we sometimes even pull taffy. And there was a sense of belonging, of being welcome, and yet at the same time, definitely living this gospel standard.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, all of my friends respected it. I think they appreciated it more than I did. But it was a wholesome, friendly, inviting atmosphere at our home on Sunday afternoons and Sunday evenings. And I think Mother facilitated that. And I think she practiced. I think she thought about what it would take.
Really, I remember Mother coming down the stairs when she was very, very pregnant, very, very tired, and in fact, as I recall, very, very grumpy. and I remember Grandpa saying, my dad saying, "Isn't Mama beautiful?" And he really did mean that. And he often, I would hear him, he would say that, "Isn't Mama beautiful?" She really did know that she was really beautiful always in his mind, and she was a beautiful woman. She had very, very good taste and very classy taste. In fact, one of the nicest stores that had the ritziest clothes, the head person in that store would call Mother when they had something that she thought she should come and look at. And I think this very lady told Mother, "Oh, you must always wear blue." His mother had such beautiful blue eyes, and Mother did wear a lot of blue. I think that really. But I think I knew, I don't know how early, but I knew they were really a striking couple.
What do you mean by striking?
Just beautiful people in every way, but I'm thinking now of physically. They were just a handsome couple. They really were. And they, when they would go places, they would look very nice. They were in public, they always appeared very neat, very, Mother was very beautiful. She had lovely clothes, beautiful hats. I remember some of her hats that were, they were so stylish, and Grandpa also, wore the hat. But I do remember realizing they are really beautiful people.
It seems like cars were so important to me, even though they weren't that important to Mom and Dad. And I remember once I said, "Well, Dad, now you can afford to get a Cadillac. We can have a really nice car." And he said, "If we have a nice car, they're going to charge us more to repair it. They'll charge us more for gas, they'll charge us more for oil. And so it's better to have an Oldsmobile rather than a Cadillac." But we got this brand new Oldsmobile, and I think that was the Oldsmobile 98.
He had bought a brand new Oldsmobile 98. Now this would have been maybe 55 or 56, where they had those tail lights that looked like rocket engines. They were sharp and pointed. And I asked to use the car, and I backed out of the driveway when our bishop, or I don't know if he was a bishop then or not, Lou Larch, was at our house. And I was not used to having a car parked across the street from us, so as I backed out, both of these pointed taillights of the Oldsmobile smashed right into his brand new Cadillac and just poked 2 holes right through his car. So I went in the house and I told, with a real bowed head and really worried, I told Dad what happened. And Dad wasn't very concerned at all, but Lou Larch was very concerned. He says, "Well, don't you look behind you when you back out of the driveway?" And I said, "Well, I'm not used to having cars parked there." And I remember Grandpa saying, kind of tapping Lou on the shoulder, said, "Lou, you have insurance, it'll be okay." And then he said to me, he says, "Don't worry about it, we can get it fixed. Just no harsh words or anything like that."
And you know, Dad was bishop during the war. And that's one of my real memories, is his writing to the service boys from our ward. He really took an interest, because we had no missionaries during that time. But he was really concerned about every one of the service boys.
Probably shouldn't tell this story, but I remember one time, it was while Dad was serving as bishop, so I must have been 10, 8, 9, something. And our Sunday school teacher didn't show up, so they sent us to the class older than us. And it was John Anderson and myself, and we didn't want to be there. We had a marble that we were rolling back and forth on the back seat, and the teacher said, "Now quit that noise." And we did it again, and so he got really upset, and a couple of these bigger boys, because it was 2 or 3 classes ahead of us, and they took, well, I was first, and then John came, or no, they threw John out first and then me. And 2 of them took my hands and 2 of them took my feet, and they'd swing 1, 2, 3, and out in the hall we'd go. And you know how that, in the basement of the 3rd ward, how the hall goes this way and then this way. And I remember as I landed on the floor, Dad came around the corner, and the people in the class said, "Yikes, the bishop!" And they quickly closed the door, and I was there looking up at Grandpa and Dad. And I remember, I wondered what was going to happen, you know, these guys could get in trouble or whatnot. I remember him just walking by and just kind of smiling, and just kept on going, didn't say a word, didn't do a thing, you know.
I just remember that it was on Wednesday, and she would start right after the primary the previous Wednesday, and she would have a list of all of the kids, member and non-member, and she wasn't satisfied to just get every member of the primary there. She tried to get every kid in the area to primary.
I remember seeing a picture that Mom took when she decorated a tricycle and put me in a costume to ride in a parade, you know, a children's parade. And that kind of brings back a memory that Mom was concerned about. Some of the children had angel wings, and she didn't want to teach us false doctrine by putting angel wings on. So that is very, very early.
Well, she just loved children. I remember when she went around the world with, well, I think it was when Dee got home from his mission. They did. And with she and Dad, and they took pictures of children all over the world. And, you know, she just found them. Yeah. That was just a beautiful thing.
Well, the biggest one was when Dee finished his mission in Japan, and this wonderful around the world tour that Mom and Dad went on. And so there was the 4 of us at home, and I was either junior or senior in high school. For about 6 weeks is what I think they went. And John and Jean lived in Idaho Falls at that time, and I think they checked in on us. And there was a lot of frozen casseroles in the freezer down in the basement. I kind of remember going to piano lessons one time and saying that Mr. Somers asked me how come I was so tired, and I said something about that we ran out of food. And I remember, boy, the next day there was, Jean was over there, and the Relief Society was over there.
They were gone for like a month, and George was, and then Beth really was the mom, and I was kind of the dad, and we were just on our own little kids, and they were gone for maybe 2 months. I don't remember. It was a long time, and it was during school, and it was quite an adventure when they left.
And I said, since we're almost halfway around the world, could we go all the way around? and I was interested in architecture at the time. That was my intent, to be an architect. So they flew over to Japan, and I met them there, and then we came home around the world. We stopped. First we toured Japan and went to many of the places that I had served in Japan, and then we went on down to Hong Kong, and I don't remember all the stops, Bangkok, Rangoon. We went to India, and even on the trip we would stay in very nice hotels when we were coming back from Japan. I remember we stayed at the Nile Hilton, a brand new Hilton hotel on the Nile in Egypt. And Grandma's comment was, "This is so expensive. Think how we could have used this money to help the Haymores." And so the next place, we got a lot cheaper hotel. But that was not up to Grandma's standards, so from then on we got better hotels, and there was no more said about that.
We would sing songs and play games, and we were happy. And Dad would get nervous sometime and tell us all to be quiet. We were kind of rowdy kids. I remember that these trips were big trips. One was all the way up to Alaska, a road trip that took days and days and days.
This was before the road was paved, and boy, that was a long ways up there. They called it the Alcan Highway, Alaska-Canada Highway, and it was just a windy dirt road for I don't know how long, but like a week.
Dad had things planned out really well. We knew exactly what milepost to stop at, for example, to get out of the car and walk a mile or a half mile, and then go fishing at that particular spot at a river that was right there that his cousin, who was a trucker, had told him about. And the fishing was just absolutely fabulous.
We stopped and caught fish one day, and then took them to just a little restaurant on the side of the road, which was just a little shack that had fish to eat.
That you'd caught?
Yeah, that we had caught. And some other people came behind us, and this was just, there weren't very many people. You wouldn't see people on the old highway for, not very many cars could even make it that far. And these people says, "Oh, we'll have some fish too." And then the restaurateur said, "Well, you have to go catch your own," like they did. But it was David, John and David, and then Larry Anderson and me and Dee, I guess.
I didn't get to go, and the older boys got to go. And it's interesting that Dad stayed with us for a long time. We had a real close association towards the end of his life. He several times told me that he sure did wish he would have taken me to Alaska.
Fairbanks, Alaska. And even there, Dad knew people. There were people that he knew everybody.
And he knew people almost instantly, made friends with strangers, but also seemed to know people almost at every place we would go, which always amazed me. I thought that being with Dad was sort of like being with the President of the United States or somebody that everybody knew and loved. It felt that way back as a child.
When I finished my mission in Peru, which I'd been down there for about 2 years and 8 months, and I was really pretty much ready to come home, but I got a letter from my folks saying that they weren't going to come pick me up. They had picked up Dee, and they had picked up Dick, and John, and Mary Jane, and I felt maybe it harked back to that other time of being on the tail end and getting left out or whatever. And I felt so bad about it, and I prayed, and I think my mother probably has told a story about this, just poured my heart out in prayer, kind of my disappointment. And my mother simultaneously picked up that message up here in Idaho and told Dad, you need to go down and pick up Joe. That was in 1965, and at the time I was very concerned about both of them because of their extreme age, whether they would travel well in Peru. Anyway, we traveled, and Dad wanted to visit Uruguay, where the headquarters of the South American Mission were. And he wanted to go visit A. Theodore Tuttle, who was on assignment as the general authority in charge of South America. And I thought that would be fine. I'd like to see Uruguay also. But he, without any particular advance appointment or anything, just when we got to Uruguay, got a cab and asked me to help get us there, and talked to the cab driver in Spanish, and we're going to go out and see President Tuttle. Well, I was a young missionary, and this was the general authority in charge of all of the missionary work in South America. And I said, Dad, he doesn't have time for us just to drop in on him. He is a very important and a very busy person. We can't just show up and say hi. And I always remember, I've used this example many times in my own life, but I guess people can take it however they want. I remember Dad saying, oh no, there's nothing he'd rather do than visit with us. And I almost was embarrassed. And I remember we went out, they had this big complex of office buildings, and where President Tuttle's home was, and then a church office building. And Dad said if he's available, it was always polite, never demanding, if he's available, that Delbert and Groberg and his son Joseph are here, we'd like to visit with you. And I remember what was in my mind was a quick handshake, good to see you, and hope you enjoy your travels, and back to work by President Tuttle. What happened was a complete, I'm sure, rearrangement of the afternoon schedule. There was nothing that President Tuttle wanted to do, and I don't think it was just being faked, than to sit and visit with Dad. And we probably visited for a half hour or so, just in his office. And I think that people did that because they did feel that here was a good person. Here was somebody who was on the same side as they were in terms of everything that was good and important to be done. Someone that I enjoy visiting with, someone I enjoy associating with, someone after I visited with him, I'll be a better person. And President Tuttle knew that. And I think he knew that from just short experiences up in Idaho when he taught seminary here. But I always remember Dad saying, no, there's nothing he'd rather do.
I agree with Mother. I think Grandma Holbrook, might have been the one perfect woman. She really was an amazingly capable and energetic. And she had 11 children also, and was just a wonderful mother, And my mother, I think my mother never questioned anything her mother said. I think she totally, has had total faith that her mother knew what was right. And I think that it was maybe a little difficult for Mother that she didn't get that same total respect, even idolization from her bunch of rowdy kids. It was, we were quite different and quite different from Mother. This this happens. I'm sure she sometimes felt she had the wrong kids.
But one thing about Mother, with, there really were lots of problems with any raising this many children in full time. And Dad was very, very good, but he had to support us all, and he always was almost full time in the church too, and community, and with many other things. And but just imagine. But I think Mother's, a lot of her inspiration was that her mother did it.
Yeah.
And that it wasn't just like somebody who was a god or something that told us these things, but her actual mother went through these steps and showed that it can be done. And she was just very determined that her mother, even though her mother was alive during all of the children.
Right, yeah.
She didn't die till George, I think, was like about 8 years old, something in that area, and just always a real strong example and encouragement to her.
She really was.
That there was a mortal person that did it, and
right.
an example, and was right there in flesh and blood even then.
And she wanted to please her mother, and to make her mother happy.
But I think that she thought that was right, though. I think that she thought there was a direct relationship between, what God wanted her to do and her mother, she was just an example. My mother's father was a real good Grandpa Holberg. He was a real fisherman.
He was a real fisherman, and he'd come bring us fish.
So many times Grandpa Holbrook would come, drop Grandma Holbrook off and say to David and myself and maybe Dick sometimes, "Okay, come on boys, let's go fishing." And the last thing we wanted to do was to go fishing with Grandpa Holbrook. He was such a strange fisherman. He made you be quiet, and he made you do this, that, and the other. And it just wasn't anything that I looked forward to at all. And I remember one time we were up at Last Chance. And no one could catch any fish, and Grandpa Holbrook just went out and started catching fish. I mean, he could just always catch fish. And he loved this sweetened condensed milk. And he'd opened a little bit and had a spoonful or two of it. And I think it was just David and I were there. And so we went over and took another spoon and ate it all. When Grandpa came back, he said, "Did you boys see some chipmunks around here? Seems like someone's taken all of my sweet condensed." Because, he'd lost his teeth by then. And anyway, I remember one time when Grandma Holbrook came, I don't remember which child it was, and she always seemed so strict with us. As I look now, that was the right thing to be. She wouldn't let us be around Mom and wanted Mom to rest. And I remember one day we had a little sign that said, "Kick me." And then we put some tape on it and went up to while Grandma was vacuuming the floor and slapped her on the back and said, "Hi, Grandma, how you doing?" and just within a little while, Grandpa Holbrook came and come back from a fishing trip or something, and he came in and he saw Grandma Holbrook busily ironing around. He saw that sign on her back. He just started laughing. He said, "Sina, I think it's time we leave."
I say that about Grandpa coming to our home and visiting all the time. But when I was up at the Y and I would pass him, I would could never quite decide whether to say hello to him or not. Because he was obviously always thinking, Sometimes as I went by, I would just say, "Hi, Grandpa." But most of the time I didn't even really speak to him, and I don't think he hardly recognized me as one of his grandchildren, because seemed to me he was always thinking about something as he walked along. He had something important on his mind.
Dad was always tied up. And I heard that so much that I thought somebody, I was so young, I thought somebody had come in and tied him up. He couldn't, we were always headed for trips, and he was never ready to go. And then where they parked there was, if you blocked his little entrance into his parking lot, where there's only like about 2 parking places, then you'd always get a ticket. He just got tickets and tickets and tickets there for blocking his own parking lot. But a man came in who Dad had been assigned to make an appraisal because of a power line was going through, and this man didn't want the power line to go through, but it was an eminent domain type thing where it had to go through, and it did touch his land, and he came in and was just furious. Don't you ever go on my land again? And he was all just really irate, an old-time farmer and you're never welcome there, and don't do it. And well, Dad didn't have any, he had to do it. It was like an ordered deal for an easement for a power company. And I remember he just looked at the guy and he says, well, one thing remember, you're always welcome to come here into the office. And the fellow didn't know what to do, so he just left.
I always felt that Grandpa probably made a lot of money, and had he not had such a large family and not been so generous with helping almost anybody, that he would have been super wealthy. He was probably a financial genius, and maybe really blessed, but I think he gave an awfully lot to people in need, whoever it might be.
And not just that, but big donations to BYU, Rick's.
Big donations, giving land. He told me once that some of his best business deals were things that he got into, and like the Avalon Apartments, and there were old people living there, and he didn't want to raise the rents. It was a real losing proposition to him. But he didn't want to hurt them, and people couldn't pay the rent. He would just say, "It's okay, when you have the money." And then the property would increase in value, and he says that was some of the best deals he ever had. His intent was really just to be helpful, and they probably could have made money earlier or something by selling or kicking the people out, but instead he just let them stay there. If they didn't have the money, it's okay. But he never talked about that. I mean, I'd have to get this in little bits and pieces, because he was just very humble about that, never talked about it. In fact, even at his funeral, I don't think that really came out. And probably that he maybe wouldn't want it to have.
Yeah.
Dad always felt that there was time. He believed that human relations were all important. Being respectful was all important, and there was time. And I think mainly it's probably related to age. I would always be pushing, let's get this done. Dad was seldom in a hurry, and I'm relating this to mild manners, in that I many times thought, well, these people are busy, they need to get this done, and Dad's answer would always be, no, it's more important to them that we treat them with respect, and we enjoy the relationship, and we have we take time to make sure it's right.
He was just really a hard worker. He would get up at 6 in the morning and meet with the Forest Service people, and then drive into the courthouses and the real estate offices and talk to the landowners. And he was just really determined to get as much done you know, during that week, and all of the background work, and then at night I would just be tired from driving and doing everything, because we were up at 5:30 or 6 in the morning, and he would just keep working till 9:30 or 10 at night. And I remember I just, you know, we'd have a nice motel and stuff like that, and I'd want to watch TV or do something, and Dad would just keep going till like 9 or 10 at night, you know, and then it would start. So he knew how to work.
Dad, at one time, a lot of people don't realize this, he actually left our business. John was involved in it, and I think Dick by that time, and actually managed a savings and loan in Idaho Falls. I remember one of the associates, and somebody who respected Dad, brought in some money, of which at that time would have been a large portion of this man's savings, and asked Dad to deposit it in the savings and loan. And of course, this is what savings and loan was in business for, is collect these deposits and then make loans. But Dad had, through his association with the savings and loan, come to believe that the deposits were not going to be secure. So here's another dilemma. If you accept the deposit, that's going to help the savings and loan. It'll give it more liquidity. That's his employer. But if you are trusted by this individual and the savings and loan fails and this individual loses his money, that would not be right either. And I remember very well, sometime after that the savings and loan failed. Dad had in the meantime withdrawn, had pointed out some of the problems that the savings and loan was going to have, and the state authorities were involved, and it was back in a time when it seemed like real estate and investments of that nature were not nearly as sure as they seem to be today. But I remember this man rushing over to see Dad and saying, you know, I brought my savings over here. Now the savings, it hadn't filled yet, but it had closed. Now it's closed. And Dad said, well, here's your check. I never deposited it. And several weeks, I think, had gone by. So Dad was actually taking a risk, but that's a true experience.
When I was, I don't know, 12, 13, or 14, we'd have the church farm, and we would have, we would clear out the weeds from the ditch bank at the church farm. And I remember this one time, we were cleaning out the weeds, and one by one, the other dads and sons and everything left, you know, until it was just us and the caretaker, you know. And I said, Dad, you know, everybody's leaving. And he says, well, that doesn't mean we have to leave now. We're staying until it's done, you know. And so we were kind of towards the end. And I remember the other thing is that we would, this is maybe younger, maybe, I don't know, maybe when I was 12, we would thin beets. And Dad would just go off so fast, you know, and he just had a tremendous ability to thin beets, and he knew how to do it, and he would just do it fast, and he just seemed like he loved it, you know. And he said that growing up, you know, he'd get so much for an acre or something, like a couple of dollars, you know, that he certainly knew how to thin beets.
Do you remember once that Mother said that she had never known Dad to do an unkind thing? That's probably going to be said more than once. But Dad had a real, almost some kind of an obstruction in his mind that would not let a mean or unkind or hurtful word come out. And I think this was a lifelong experience, probably developed over a lifetime, but many times, and I'm not talking now just about the last few months or years of his life, but I had a close association with him for 20 or 30 years there. Sometimes I could tell that the right thing to say, the kind of correct, straightforward thing to say in answer to a question or an inquiry that I was making, particularly maybe about a business transaction or something, would be to be critical of some party in it. That would be the more straightforward approach. For example, the man didn't pay what he owed, or the man didn't honor his obligation. Dad would never say that. You could not trick him into saying it. It was never anything that would disparage another individual, no matter what. That didn't mean he'd be dishonest. He would just stop and think long enough so that he could say it in some way that didn't disparage or be hurtful to another person. And that it was, I think, more than a practiced art. I think it was ingrained into his heart that he was not going to do this, such that he actually probably physically couldn't. You maybe knew this already,
really,
Julia.
No, that's what do you attribute that to? I mean, what?
Well, I think a sense of goodness that had surrounded him all of his life. I think he had always felt secure. He never felt that anybody else had to be cut down for him to feel secure and good. And I think sometimes our criticisms is we're trying to point out that we're right so another person is wrong. I think Dad never had any of those types of insecurities.
And it was always the same, consistently and never critical, but understandable. Like I would say that be careful of this guy because he has a tendency to try to rip you off, something of that nature. And Dad wrote to Paul, he says, this man wants to buy one of our farms out in west of the town or something, someplace. And he said, no, we need to be aware of this because he'll probably want to execute a very good sale.
You know, I worked one summer up there for Delbert. Somehow they thought I could help in the office, and I don't think I was that good, but they tolerated me for the summer. I really appreciate that opportunity to work for your dad because it really, he always had an unusual ability to know how to approach and help people. And, I can remember different, people coming in and talking to him. I remember one fellow coming in that was really upset about something and blustering and just sort of an overbearing type of fellow. And it's the only time I ever heard your dad raise his voice. And I thought, my mouth just fell open. I'd never ever seen your dad, upset or angry. And anyway, the fellow was quite meek after that. And they talked for a minute, and I don't know how long, and took care of whatever problem there was, and he left. And Delbert turned around and laughed, and he said, sometimes you just have to outdo them.
Through all of my adolescence, I frequently became ill. I'd be nauseated, have a headache, dizzy, terribly dizzy, and my mind would slow down, stop working right. My tongue would get numb, my fingers would. And all we did was I would go to bed, and Mom would bring me up a nice warm bowl of cream of mushroom soup. I never remember consulting a doctor. It went on for years and years. Mom said, when you get through with adolescence, it'll pass. But Mother went regularly because she was either pregnant or having a new baby just about all the time. And she went regularly to the doctor. And like I say, she took us for our immunizations.
Mother would say, you just do the natural thing.
Yeah,
and
the natural's the better.
The natural is always the better, yeah.
What were some of her natural remedies?
Cream and mushroom soup. But if we go clear till a lot later, when I was a single working girl and came home and asked Mom for an aspirin, she said, well, I have some up in the top cupboard in the kitchen, but I don't think you should take aspirin.
Yeah, I think she was worried about any kinds of pills.
When Dad was, I believe it was 1950, that Dad was sick when he had the pancreatitis, and I was with David and I remember when if Dad had been in the hospital for some time, that her mother realized that it really was important. Remember, she just fainted or just laid right down on the floor, just like collapsed, and just wouldn't get up for a while. And then finally she just get herself together and get up.
He took us fishing quite a bit, and I remember once we were going up to, I think, Max Inn or someplace fishing, and we got as far as like Rigby or Rexburg, and Grandpa was feeling kind of uncomfortable, and he stopped and said, I have to go in here for a minute. And it was a hospital that he went into. And we waited in the car for quite a while, and finally a doctor came out and said, your father is sick. And I think one of the boys, maybe David or John, was old enough they could drive, and they drove us home. But that was when Dad had somehow run into the edge of a car door and injured his kidneys. And while I didn't think much of it at the time, it turned out to be a very life-threatening injury. He was at home for a long time in the bed, and but I never heard him complain, even when it was so life-threatening, must have been so painful to us. He just said, can you just wait here in the car? I need to go into the hospital for a minute.
I remember one time we had gone up to Rick's to go to a musical thing, and the Provo thing had come up. In fact, this was a time when Dad had said, well, Julia, what do you think? Are you glad that you didn't, or what do you think as you went away to school? And I again said, so grateful. And anyway, Mother refused to speak to us and would not go to the thing with us. And she just sat in the car. We went.
And of course, we all grew up with the lore about Provo being the center of learning and Idaho being kind of the backwoods. But, Mom turned out to love Idaho. She really had her, performed her mission here, and she understood that, and she felt that way. We had close associations with her clear to the end of her life also.
Well, I remember when I first came to Provo, I couldn't believe that we went to Idaho Falls because I thought Provo was so beautiful. One of the first things I wanted to do was hike up to the Y or go up to Timpanogos. But by then I was already a 16, 17-year-old. But growing up, I just remember that Idaho Falls was kind of a hick town for Mom. It wasn't the real place she wanted to be, and that we just had to be there for a while, and then eventually we'd go back and live where we should have been all the time, which was in Provo or Salt Lake. I wasn't ever sure which it was, but I knew it was someplace down here. So I was very aware of that conflict that she had.
I think really that was the only really, major conflict was the Provo thing. And I think Mother had felt that he had promised her. And I don't really know the whole thing. But I remember at one time when there had been, several things that had really hurt the folks, that Grandpa said, he said to me, maybe we should have moved to Provo. And I just wanted to scream, don't you ever say that, No, it's, but he rolled with things, and really their relationship was beautiful. It's sort of nice, sort of comforting to have this one little glitch, isn't it? So you think, they really did have a human experience. It wasn't just, just this idealistic thing.
I just don't think there's anything more wonderful as I'm older and look and see what's real and what's not, than the fact that they loved one another. And after they passed away and I went through their papers, I saw this started right when they first met. Mm-hmm.
All through my life, and still do have the really strong admiration for Dad for feeling so much love for Mom, for just thinking that she was the most wonderful human being on the planet. I said, Mom isn't that great, but Dad always treated her as though she was like a jewel, a pearl, just a wonderful, wonderful woman.
There were a couple of things, and this was true throughout his life. There were a couple of things that he did not allow to be criticized. Of course, we all know one was Mother. That was the one thing that I received corporal punishment for as a young child. I was sitting around the dinner table and I said something critical of Mom, probably that I didn't like the food that was being cooked or something of that nature. But anyway, it was a criticism of Mother, and this is when I was small. And it turned out that I'm not sure if I was sitting right next to Dad, but I was close enough to him around our big dinner table there on 12th Street that before I could finish my criticism, Dad's hand reached out and grabbed my ear and twisted it so hard that I could not finish my statement. It hurt a lot.
He would always pretty much agree with whatever she wanted to do. And they had an interesting relationship. When I think back about Mom and Dad now, I think of a really vibrant, young couple. But I do remember, in the finances and going places and different things, they definitely had lots of disagreements, but they seemed to get away from us and hash it out and resolve it, because Mom was definitely a determined, opinionated woman. Very strong.
I think the most meaningful thing to me at this point in my life is their relationship with each other. I think that there was just never any question that they supported each other. I mean, kids try to play one against the other. You couldn't do that. You couldn't do that with Mom and Dad. They were united, and I really, really appreciated that, the fact that their relationship. And of course, I never thought of Mom as a wife growing up. I thought of her as my mom, of course. And but I've thought about that more recently, the fact that she was first and foremost a wife. I mean, they just had a wonderful relationship. They just supported each other. They complimented each other. They loved each other.
We would inevitably foul balls off or something because we'd have home plate right near the fence between our yard. And we were, when we'd knock the balls in, we would be accused of trampling down her flowers. But I remember, this was probably when I was like 10 or 12. We had friends that went to Jackson Hole and they had these bottle rockets and everything. And one 4th of July, or near 4th of July, we just stormed her house with bottle rockets, to kind of get our even, because Dad would really get on us for trampling Mrs. Charlesworth's flowers.
I'd get a BB gun, and I would go up in our tree house in back of our house and shoot the windows out of the garage of Mrs. Charlesworth. Now, Mrs. Charlesworth is kind of a grumpy lady, and so we thought this was just fair payback. It seemed like he liked fishing quite a bit. He used to go fishing quite a bit. And, it's something that as he got older and we got older, we didn't think much about. But when I was young, Dad used to do all sorts of hunting and fishing. We had a 12-gauge shotgun, 20-gauge shotgun, and we would go out duck hunting and pheasant hunting, and we would wait, and we'd shoot the ducks and shoot the geese, and we were really happy if we could get them, and we'd bring them home, and Mom would say, be careful about the pellets, you're gonna have some gunshot in there, so we'd have to be careful how we ate them, and we'd have fish a lot, yeah.
Did he enjoy fishing?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that Dad, I don't think he really enjoyed anything like that, particularly.
Well, it's very possible that he didn't like it. Maybe he just did it to please other people. He would go with his Brunt relatives. He would take us. He would go with maybe friends in the Kiwanis Club. But he would go a lot hunting and fishing.
He told me once that Grandma Brunt, when he was probably 15 or 12, I don't know, somewhere in his teenage years, before she died, he said that she took him aside, and because they lived just right over here, and said, one day there's going to be a temple right over here, and you're going to have something to do with it, and you better get prepared. And she says it's going to be a beautiful white temple, and apparently she didn't tell him, but apparently she'd sort of seen it in vision. And so in the 30s, he just, after she died, just shortly after, what year did Grandma Brunt die? Probably mid-30s somewhere. And he just had this feeling that he ought to assemble this land, get the ownership. Because during the Depression, land is the opposite of what it is today. Then it was considered an albatross because you had to pay taxes on it every year. And no one wanted land. They wanted something that would produce money, especially vacant lots. And all of this land was just kind of worthless sand dunes over here. But Dad felt that he should assemble it. So he got all the ownership, listed who owned it, who was back on their taxes, how much he could buy it for. He bought quite a few of the lots, not all of them, but most of them. And then President Grant announced that they were going to build a temple in Idaho, but he didn't say where. And the city fathers here in Idaho Falls, they knew it would be either Rexburg or Idaho Falls or Blackfoot or Pocatello, some of these places that were pretty strong LDS. And a lot of them weren't members of the church, but Dad was very active in Kiwanis, the Chamber of Commerce, and all of those type of civic things. And they got a committee and appointed Dad, because he had expressed an interest, to locate some land, and the city would buy it and offer it to the church free of charge if they would build a temple here. And so they said, but we've got to hurry because these other communities are working on it too. And Dad said, I've already got it done. I accept the assignment, and here's the land. Here's the place it ought to be. Here's all the ownership. I've got this, buy this. And of course, they immediately contacted all those people, because the President Grant had said they needed, I think, a minimum of 10 acres or something like that. And this came to about 10 or 11 acres. And so within just a few weeks, they went to Salt Lake and showed the picture and presented it. And the story goes that President Grant wanted to come up and look, and he came up and looked and said, that's where the temple will be. And the other communities hadn't even gotten their bids in, so to speak. And so I felt that Grandpa really had an extra sense about Idaho Falls and about the destiny. And
she was so happy. They came over to my home. This is when I was married, and my husband was there. It was a lovely time. We also had at least one little girl, I think 2. And they came over. They had been to Salt Lake, and they came over and asked us about what was going, how we'd been for a while and so on. And then one of them mentioned we just had an interview with Malin Heslop. Well, I said, oh, he's one of the editors at the Church News. How did you happen to do that? And Dad said, I thought you'd never ask. And then they told me they'd been called to be the temple president. They were so excited.
And we've said often that we think this was, that call really made Mother
happier than anything else.
Yeah, I think she was happier with that than anything that I ever remember. It was, and also that she was happy to be in Idaho Falls.
I can remember sitting there and having the sun stream through the painted glass windows. It was our old 5th ward. And listening to her music, that was a real treat,
You played the violin, and I played the flute, and she played the piano, and we would go to wedding receptions.
Yeah, and everything.
Lots of wedding receptions.
Yeah. And isn't that amazing that, with all we had to do, that
she loved it.
There was never any question. Of course she would.
She really enjoyed it.
And she
music.
She never made a mistake. We were talking about,
she was good at
listening to her play the organ. Never. She as far as I could tell, she was perfection.
I remember many of the musicians that I was both exposed to as a student and introduced to and told were good musicians and somebody that I should respect, and that most of them were either not members of the church or not good members of the church. The fact that they smoked or carried on or whatever did not, in my mother's mind, mean that they weren't to be respected for their abilities.
Isn't that interesting? You could be good friends with them, but you don't date their daughter.
And then she was definitely a person who would persevere with kids. She was not one who would give up on things like that, so she wouldn't let me give up. And then I think with Dad, he paid for all this. None of this came free. And he paid for all of it, and of course Mother never was a breadwinner, so they had their complementary roles.
Yeah.
And one couldn't have worked without the other.
They had different rooms, so you would go there and you would practice. I mean, they had different rooms with pianos. So there would be
2 floors.
Yeah, 2 floors. So Mr. and Mrs. Summers both taught, and Mrs. Summers did the beginners, and then when you got to a certain level and a certain maturity, so you could not be too scared of Mr. Summers, you would go to his. But he would listen in each of the rooms to see how well you were doing, you know. He could hear from outside.
So it was really supervised.
It was
practice.
supervised practice, is what it was.
And they would go from room to room.
And I
and
remember,
then once a week you'd play.
And once a week
have
we
to
would pass off
your
pieces. Right. But he would thump on the door sometimes. He'd say wrong fingering, and he was nearly blind. And it was amazing. I mean, he could tell without even looking. Wrong fingering, and you know, and so he was listening. You knew.
If it was you or Beth, but when the Summers retired, and the last recital, that Dad stood up and would just say, all these years, we've got to, the children of God, the Sunday school music, and to these recitals.
That's right. Yeah. I could croak like a frog. And so they called me Froggy. And I got teased a lot.
But also,
teased a lot.
you'd make the music when they do the family orchestra or something. Then you would sit under the table.
Yeah, they would have me sit under the table
and croak.
Yeah,
with like a drum beat. But it was a frog. But can you remember how it sounded? I mean, it was.
Well, see, I was just wondering if I could still do it. It wasn't that big a deal, I didn't think. Let's see.
But everyone had to.
Can you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay. That was it.
I know my Heavenly Father knows the storms that would my way oppose, that He can turn the clouds away and turn my darkness into day, and turn my darkness into day. He knows, my Father knows, He knows, I'm sure He knows, the storms that would my way oppose. He knows, my Father knows, He knows, I'm sure He knows.
A dear friend of mine I hadn't seen for quite some time called on me, shook my hand so joyfully. Oh, it's so good to see you. But you know, right now, I can't remember your name. And I'm so sorry. Brother Corneliuson said, don't feel sorry. Right now, I can't remember it myself.
It was sort of a bonus. You know, we moved back to Idaho Falls because that's where the job was, but it really was a bonus to have the parents around, and that was something that I thought of consciously about the experience that our kids would have in their life, that just having that legacy and having that connection with mom and dad would be a good one. Well, I think it was a lot of you and everybody else that they were living for. They had purpose in their lives, and I wouldn't say they lived very healthy. I guess relatively so, in that they weren't in nursing homes. But you know, it wasn't anybody's decision except for theirs that they weren't in a nursing home. They just didn't want to be in a nursing home, and they were coherent enough to say that clearly. By the way, in reference to their coherency, Dad would speak for Mom a lot, and he would sense what she wanted, and he would tell us. Dad was always very, very clear in what he said. He may be a little slow about arriving at his decisions, but when he made his decisions, it was clear. But they took good care of themselves. They lived simply. You know, they were good sports. They ate bread and milk, and they had good life habits. When they wanted to go to sleep, they would just do it, and they took care of themselves. It was really a chapter of all of our lives that I think most of us didn't really anticipate. That is, that it would be that we would have a large section, a large time spent in our lives taking care of our parents, and I think that's something that we probably ought to prepare for better. And, you know, the generations ought to be aware of that that's just part of life. And if parents pass away quickly and easily, it's kind of the exception rather than the rule.
I want to say that in some ways, as I look back on my parents, they were at the same time exactly what you would expect everybody to be. Upright, thoughtful, industrious people trying to do their part. And I think for that very reason they are so exceptional, that they just were that way. They just actually were that way all the time, clear to the very ends of their lives. And I think that it isn't any one particular marvelous business decision that Dad made, or contribution that he made, or whatever, but just an entire long life of being not trying to be great, but trying to be exactly what was expected of a good person to be. Just to be that way in every sense, at every moment. And I think Mother the same way. She maybe had a few more notions of greatness, I don't know, but again, just these are the things that are expected. This is what the brethren say in General Conference. We just do this, and it's expected of everyone. And I think that's what makes them so exceptional, that without any deviations at all that I know, they just live that way. It's the way they wanted to be. That was their life.
So we're grateful to see you all and to say to all of you, we love you with all our hearts. We're so grateful you're here and we're so grateful that you're ours. Thanks very much. That was my 5 minutes.